Meeting number 99 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required test connections in advance of the meeting. Is my mic? Okay. I'd like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Is Ms. Ashton not here yet? She's on the line. Oh, okay. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. Thank you for all of your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, May 23rd, 2024, the committee resumes its study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. It's now my pleasure to welcome from the Canadian Beverage Association, Krista Scaldwell, the president, and from the Circular Innovation Council by video conference, Joanne St. Goddard, the executive director. So welcome. Up to 5 minutes is given for your opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. So we'll start with Ms. Scaldwell. I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Bradford. And I would like to thank the members of the committee for providing this opportunity to speak about the leadership role the beverage sector is playing in Canada to increase recycling and advance the circular economy. The Canadian Beverage Association is the national voice for more than 20 businesses representing 60 brands of non-alcoholic beverages. Our members directly employ more than 20,000 Canadians, pay more than $977 million in federal tax revenue, and contribute more than $5 billion to Canada's GDP every year. In addition to our sector's support for jobs and economic growth across the country, CBA members are leaders in sustainable packaging, design, recycling programs, and the use of recycled content in packaging. Today, we have 3 key points to address. 1, align recycled content standards with the available supply of recycled plastic material. 2, increase the supply of recycled material by supporting the development of a national framework for deposit return and recycling programs for non-alcoholic beverage containers. And 3, prevent supply chain disruptions and unintended consequences in the recycling system by excluding aluminum non-clad sheet from the aluminum surtax until additional supply becomes available. Most CBA members have committed to make their packaging recyclable, reusable, or compostable by 2025. CBA members are supplying their beverage products primarily in aluminum cans and plastic bottles, which are recyclable materials collected at a high rate and are among the most valuable commodities managed in packaging recycling systems. CBA members are also taking actions to further improve the packaging they supply by supporting the golden design rules that require the elimination of plastics and additives that disrupt recycling systems or degrade the value of other recyclables. CBA members have made recycled content commitments and support the use of recycled content standards, but those standards must align with the available supply of recycled material. To create that supply, Canada requires a national framework of well-designed deposit return and beverage container recycling systems with measurable, achievable recycling targets to collect, sort, and market enough recycled plastic for use as recycled content. All Canadian provinces except Ontario and Manitoba have a deposit return system for non-alcoholic beverage containers. Provinces with deposit return systems like British Columbia and Alberta have recovery rates ranging from 77% to 85%, along with high levels of consumer support. Ontario, which relies only on blue box collection, maintains the country's lowest recovery rate for non-alcoholic beverage containers, which is about 50%. Without a deposit return system in Canada's largest province, beverage producers will have great difficulty obtaining access to the necessary supply of recycled plastic to meet the federal government's proposed recycled content target of 60% by 2030. We ask the committee and the members of the government to ensure that any federal recycled content standards which increase the demand of recycled plastic align with the available supply of recycled plastic. We further ask the committee and members of the government to support the development of a national framework for deposit return and recycling programs for non-alcoholic beverage containers to produce the necessary supply of recycled plastic. Aluminum is one of the most recycled and recyclable materials used in packaging today. Canada's beverage container recycling programs recover more than 80% of aluminum cans. We understand the government's decision to align with the United States on a surtax applied to steel and aluminum products from China, but we ask you recognize its unintended consequences. As mentioned, the two primary types of containers for CBA members' beverage products are plastic bottles and aluminum cans. Limiting the import of aluminum used for beverage cans with little or no time to prepare will create major supply chain disruptions and could increase plastic usage. To meet demand, beverage companies may have to increase the use of plastic bottles until more aluminum can be sourced in North America. To prevent these supply chain disruptions and unintended consequences, we call on the government to exclude aluminum non-clad sheet from the list of aluminum and steel products from China, subject to a 25% surtax, until additional supply becomes available. In summary, our association's requests of the committee are for the support of the following: align recycled content standards with the available supply of recycled plastic material. Increase the supply of recycled material by supporting the development of a national framework for deposit return and recycling programs for non-alcoholic beverage containers. Prevent supply chain disruptions and unintended consequences in the recycling system by excluding aluminum non-clad sheet from the aluminum surtax until additional supply becomes available. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our members' perspective today, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell. We'll now turn to Ms. St. Goddard for your opening statement of 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to join today's meeting. My name is Joanne St. Goddard, and I'm the Executive Director of the Circular Innovation Council. We are a leading independent and non-for-profit organization focusing on accelerating Canada towards a circular economy and away from our current linear take, make, waste-based economy. For those unfamiliar with the concepts of a circular economy, it is a model that decouples economic activity from production and consumption of finite resources. To offer some context to my comments today, before becoming the CIC, for over 40 years, we were the Recycling Council of Ontario. And in that capacity, we helped shape many of Canada's waste reduction and recycling policies and programs, aimed at shifting markets towards redefining waste to valuable resources and reorganizing systems that allow discarded materials, including plastics, to become valued feedstocks in manufacturing of new products. Part of this role required our ability to unite policymakers, industry interests, and other stakeholders. And one of our greatest achievements was the launch of Canada's Blue Box Packaging and Plastics Recycling Program, created jointly by the private and public sector, currently collecting more than 65% of plastic packaging from our homes and now replicated around the world. With this experience and expertise in mind, and to respond to the committee's pursuit to conduct research to improve plastics recycling in Canada, I offer the following. Recycling doesn't need more research. Governments and industries alike clearly understand the causation of our current poor recycling rates of plastic discards, which is fundamentally attributed to the economic disparity between the low price and availability of virgin plastics and the negative value and low availability of clean, reliable, recycled plastics. For over 50 years, we have been designing and redesigning recycling programs to improve their recycling rates, spending millions on collection, infrastructure, sorting and processing, and matching operational investments with more millions towards consumer education. If we are honest, we should acknowledge that for decades, existing plastic recycling programs have effectively been financially propped up by the subsidy offered by Canadian municipalities and their respective taxpayers, making it effectively free for industry. Provincial governments are now course-correcting, introducing new producer responsibility regulations to transfer these costs to manufacturers, their supply chains, and their sellers. The primary objective of this transfer is to require these actors that design and sell plastics into the market to invest in a system that effectively collects and recycles them at end of life. Another objective, is that these new costs will incent better designed packaging and products for this system. These relatively new EPR policy interventions are starting to take effect, coalescing the financial contributions of producers who have taken ownership of the programs, becoming intimately familiar with their costs, their limitations, and corresponding opportunity to improve them. Next year, Ontario's Blue Box program alone is estimated to cost producers over $1 billion, with a significant portion of that investment dedicated to improving plastic packaging recycling specifically. Similar EPR legislations targeting other plastic products like computer equipment are also expanding, and new policies are being contemplated for other plastic products such as textiles and carpets. The effects of these new producers' funding investments, tied in part to regulated plastic recycling targets, will offer an important market investment towards new plastic recycling processes, including mechanical and chemical, efficient collection and transport infrastructure operations, improved product and packaging design, and, of course, expanded public education. As such, I would caution the committee to not proceed with research on plastic recycling at this time, but allow time for these new producer investments to take full effect. There is, however, an important opportunity for this committee to reinvest and invest in research to better understand the product designs that optimize the amount of post-consumed recycled plastics. As mentioned, the cause of our consistently low recycling rates for plastics is directly attributed to low commodity value, caused by a lack of market demand. Designing plastic products and packaging that maximizes the amount of recycled materials, backstopped by policies that require it, will spark much-needed market interest. This market demand will meet the new industry investments being made in recycling operations, which is the perfect recipe for sustained, high-performance, markets-based plastics recycling programs. Thank you.
Good, Art. My goodness, right on time. There we go. So thank you for those opening remarks. I'll now open the floor to members for questions. Please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. To start off our questioning, we'll start with MP Lobb for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much. My first question is to Ms. Scaldwell, and it's in regards to some comments from the previous meeting that a professor from Queen's had made, and I'd asked her about the case of, say, a Coca-Cola or a beverage company that they've got plastic, they've got the aluminum cans. What's the right way to go? And she said, well, actually, glass. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she basically said, I think glass is actually the best way to go. But it seems to me that would be pretty energy intensive. So is there a thing you can say that on the hierarchy of good and evil, aluminum's the best, plastic's middle, and with the energy it takes for glass, that's the worst? Or do you guys look at any of that? What should the beverage manufacturers be doing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to respond to the member's question. So I don't have the exact data with me. However, I do know that the greenhouse gas emissions and the energy to produce the glass is far less efficient, in particular the weight of it transporting it. So that's thus the choice of plastic and aluminum, both highly recyclable and both fairly equivalent in terms of the use of energy. I could look at what may be available to get more exact data for you.
Okay. In the case of, say, Red Bull and Monster and those companies, it looks to me when you go up to the convenience store, they're doing aluminum cans. But then when you look at companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and those companies, they've got a variety. They've got some plastic and they have some aluminum, and they're all in different shapes and sizes. Why do they do that? Why do they have some in plastic and some in aluminum, and why don't they just do them all in aluminum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to respond to the member. I don't have an answer to that. I can ask that question, canvass the members, and get back to you. Some products, different companies, however, do produce in Canada, and some produce outside of Canada. So the availability of the packaging available would likely be part of that, but I will get back to you on the exact answer.
Okay. If you were going to do a 500 milliliter design, what is the more cost-effective option, a plastic bottle or an aluminum can for a 500 milliliter? Or a liter, whatever it is.
Again, Madam Chair, I'll have to get an exact answer, and sometimes we don't have the cost because it's competitive amongst the members, so I would have to get aggregated data and get that back to you.
Okay, because I think that is useful when you're looking at these things at maybe at a government level, I guess, to say, all right, we have people that come and say this and that, and there's practical reasons why some things are the way they are. The number you said was 84% of recycled aluminum cans. Is that the
Through you, Madam Chair, 80%?
80%? And that's non-alcoholic cans?
Non-alcoholic.
What is, do you know what the number is for alcoholic beverages that are in aluminum cans?
Through you, Madam Chair, I do not have that number here, and it would vary similarly for us by province. And Ontario does have deposit return for aluminum alcohol containers that we do not have.
Okay. I mean, I realize that's provincial, but it might be worthwhile to get that information back to the committee to see, all right, is it 100% in the alcohol aluminum can market and bottle? And is it, you know, if it's 80%, is that delta worth the difference, or what is the right way to go? And what's it, did you provide the numbers province by province for the aluminum can returns?
I didn't province by province, but the average is between 77 and 84%.
Okay, and what's
Our two highest performing provinces are Alberta and Saskatchewan for recyclable.
I'm sure Mr.
rates of
Pearson
recycling.
and Mr. Kitchen are thrilled to know that there. I guess we'll live up to, oh, and Mr. Tucker too, how could I forget? Is there any other final messages or thoughts that we should have as a committee from your organization on what is the right thing to do or what is the best thing to do?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to respond to the member. I do think there is an opportunity to harmonize policies across the country so that there is a chance for provinces that are lagging to learn from provinces such as Alberta and Saskatchewan, opportunity to convene a working group of those brands that are impacted and look at, there's recycling affiliates by province that look at the rates and look at the systems. It would be, I think, very beneficial for Canadians. In particular, it makes it more efficient. Doing it by province is not efficient for companies, and therefore this is the opportunity.
The other question, and this isn't about plastics, it's a little off track, but there are cardboard beverage options. I'm not saying for the soft drink industry, but for juice and different ones. A lot of the recycling companies, they don't accept those as an option. And I'm just wondering, what do they, do those go to landfill? I mean, some collect them, but I don't think they end up getting recycled. So what happens to them?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That would be a question I'd need to ask the recycling affiliates because I would be speculating otherwise. However, I could put that question out and get a response.
Is that it?
Mr. Love, yes.
Okay.
So now we'll turn to MP Callaway for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, everyone, and thanks for the witnesses coming today. My questions will be to Ms. St. Goddard. I'm particularly interested in the reuse program, which aims to eliminate single-use plastic waste on a national basis. And I'm wondering if you can describe and unpack a little bit more of what that program is. And do you think you could point to Canadians when we would expect to see this program active in stores?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So this is a program that we've been working on as an organization in partnership with some leading grocery retailers for the better part of about 2 years now. I'm pleased to say that we are anticipating a launch in Ottawa. The pilot project will be focused in the city of Ottawa initially to be tested and perfected and then expanded across the country. What makes this reuse experiment or pilot unique is that it is a collaborative approach. I spoke in my comments about our role as an organization to bring otherwise competing entities together around a common good and a common interest. And this is exactly what we've done with the reuse project. So we have worked with 3 groceries, Walmart Canada, Sobeys, and Farm Boy together under the Empire Group, as well as Metro, to identify a common set of reuse containers that they can utilize in store. And they've had the autonomy in terms of decision where in store they want to use those. And in a place-based way, working with the City of Ottawa, and I might say that we were also funded by the Environment and Climate Change Canada to run this pilot. But with the supports of all of these entities, we've worked and identified a catchment area in Ottawa where we'll be deploying these containers in 6 grocery locations, and in fact have gone door to door at neighboring restaurants to see if they'd want to share in the pilot. And in fact, at this date, as of today, we have 11 of them that have confirmed. So what we're trying to do is build a critical mass and really provide containers as a service as opposed to containers as an asset. And each of the participating entities, be they grocers or restaurants, will actually share in the container use, the washing and sanitization services, the deployment of the containers, and the logistics to move them about in the system. So as I've mentioned, the launch date is October 17th. I'm very much looking forward to seeing all of you with one of our reuse containers in your hands for lunch. And we'll be running the pilot for 12 months, collecting all of the data, both in terms of costing, environmental benefits, as well as social benefits and jobs creation. And testing the existing ecosystems of service providers, growing the businesses in Ottawa, and diversifying their services by onboarding them into this pilot.
Excellent. We'll have to have one of those pilots in Cape Breton, where I'm from.
I would welcome that. I would welcome that.
As the kids say, we'll talk. I was intrigued by, just a few moments ago, you talked about reaching out to other businesses to get involved. And when we're talking about change, that can be very complex, and it can be hard to get people on side with a new approach, a new process. So I'm just curious, when you reached out to businesses, what was your pitch? Because I find whether it's government policy on any level, or just general change management, people need to understand the why. What was your why when you went to them?
Yeah, it was slightly different depending on who we were talking to. And I might say that the pitch really was informed by a year of research in terms of understanding where there were barriers. What were these barriers? Were they cost? Were they management? Were they understanding? Were they education? Were they culture? Were they language? So there's a variety of different barriers that we identified. And we didn't look just to the Canadian context. We looked around the world. And we plucked, if you will, the best in show attributes of working reuse programs. And we combined them. So the pitch, really, to answer your question directly, was probably distilled down to a couple of things. First, a misunderstanding that it was harder or required more effort or more cost, more management to use reuse containers over single use. And we were able to dispel that myth by bringing real-time, time-bound studies, and really demonstrating by working with each restaurant and grocery store independently that there really wasn't much change. Container's a container. And so that was one of the barriers of the myths we have to dispel. The second was absolutely cost. And again, unique to our pilot, there is no way in a geography like Canada when we're so disaggregated, and it's a very large geography. It's very expensive for a grocery store, given they have locations across the country, to create a program by themselves. They would have to move these containers between their locations, and it gets quite complicated and quite expensive. And so the availability for them to pay a subscription fee, a membership to get access to this program, made it much more cost effective. They eliminated their need to purchase single-use containers. They also, most importantly, got to subtract the reuse containers that they were able to deploy from their extended producer responsibility fees, because reuse does not attract an EPR cost. So when they combined those elements of cost savings, it was a bit of a no-brainer.
Thank you very much.
I'll turn to MP Blanchard-Jonca for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est un plaisir de saluer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to greet our witnesses who are here to support a study based on science and research. So, Ms. Saint-Gaudard, I have a question that is very important, and maybe it's a simple question. Is the management of a manufactured product made of plastic has positive impact on the environment and the health of the population?
Can I just repeat the question for context and understanding? I understand the question to be, is my opinion that a manufacturer of a plastic product, do they make a contribution to the social well-being and economic well-being of Canada?
Exactement.
Exactly.
Okay, that's great. What I would say is of course, if they are manufacturing in a Canadian context, they probably are employing people. So I would imagine that there is a job benefit and a social benefit to doing that. The reality is we don't manufacture a mini plastic anything in Canada. So, the increasing single-use plastics in the Canadian market does very little for the Canadian economy. Of the 400 billion tons of plastics produced globally, we're less than 6% in terms of what we manufacture here. We have much more opportunity to actually grow our green economy by improving our ability to innovate around collection and recycling and designing with our innovation more recycled content of plastics in products and packaging. I think we've learned very clearly in the pandemic when we saw single-use plastic use triple, that having long supply chains can make us quite vulnerable. And so I think there is an opportunity for us to look domestically, shorten our supply chains, both in terms of production, but also rather than going through all the expense and effort of our citizens collecting and then shipping this raw material to other parts around the world, only to buy products that actually have these recyclables as part of the makeup. We'd be better off to try to find ways of creating and shortening the supply chain and creating an economy for
Madame
plastics right
Saint-Gaudard,
here.
ça répond à
Madame, this answers my question. Not a short answer, but it's a very good response. Thank you very much for your information. Does the organization you represent have a consultation with the federal government regarding the act modifying the act concerning the protection of the environment, most notably the use of single-use plastics, which was brought in by the federal government in the last few years?
Yeah, we were very actively involved in the development and responded to each of the tools within that policy package. And I do personally actually sit on the advisory committee to the minister as it relates to plastic policy.
Merci, Madame Saint-Gaudard. J'aimerais que vous
Thank
puissiez...
you, Madame Saint-Gaudard. I would like you to share your perspective based on the science and research, because you understand right now we have some protests in course, and this is public, Dow Chemical, Imperial Oil, Nova Chemicals. These are all companies that came here to testify, but they had another perspective. And I would like to hear you, so based on science and research, I mean, when parliamentarians ask questions on the toxicity of plastic, I'm just asking myself, have they ever seen a research paper on this topic, or do they simply not believe science? So as an expert, I wanted to hear you. You are an expert, a scientific expert representing an organization that is all about, recycling and the environment.
Yeah. I don't think there's any dispute related to plastic discards and plastic pollution leaking into our environment. And I think there's a growing body of research that is trying to quantify its effects, both in terms of what it's doing to our environment, but also what it's doing to wildlife and human health. And that body of research is growing. And there's really been no dispute in even the early research that there are grave negative impacts as it relates to microplastics and other chemical compounds that are part of fossil fuel-based plastics in the system. And I don't think that's undisputable. And unfortunately, the rate of production of plastics continues to grow, and our rate of recycling is declining. So we're headed in the wrong direction. There's no question about that. I think it's pretty self-evident why some of the chemical companies or other manufacturers might have more interest in trying to support recycling efforts than they would reduction efforts, in terms of self-efficacy and self-continuation. We have a long way to go on the recycling side, but we will not recycle our way out of this problem. I think you've heard this at a committee several times. No research or science will tell us that. We know this already. So this is going to be a combination of elimination, reduction, of swapping out plastic materials to other alternatives, and of course, to expand recycling.
Merci, Mme Saint-Godard. Vous savez,
Thank you,
concernant
Madame Saint-Godard. And regarding talking about recycling and circular economy, we have data. I mean, they're from 2016, but only 9% of recycling in Canada is for plastic. 86 goes to landfill. A large percentage go in landfill, and much of it goes into nature. We're not talking about circular economy when I'm talking about this data.
Unquestionably, you're quite right. And what's not measurable and where we're starting to measure is the microplastics. Very difficult thing to quantify, and that's a whole other impact that really deserves research and time and money.
So now we will turn to MP Ashton for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. My first question is to Ms. Saint-Godard. If you could speak to us a bit about what you found, which incentive systems work best when it comes to recycling?
Yeah, well, I think I would agree with my other friendly witness that deposit return systems have proven to be successful. The beer industry is one great example. For almost 100 years, they've been able to recover all of their containers, irrespective of material type, to somewhere between 85 and 95%. And so it's just really stood the test of time. And they have an integrated system where they use reverse logistics to drop off new product and take back containers. I might mention a portion of what they've been able to do so successfully, which has an economic opportunity as well as refill. So deposit return places a bounty, a financial bounty. It creates a value where there might not be. I spoke of the low value of plastic discards, and that's why we have disparity in the system and we can't incent recycling. But it places a financial bounty or a reward, if you will, to the consumer to do their part. And in this case, using the beer example, take back when they pick up a new case of beer. So we know that financial incentives are very, very impactful. We also know that there is some evidence that municipalities have tried other disincentives. So mechanisms like clear bags at the end of the curb, where it might show there's some inspection, if you will, very, very basic, where if there's too many recyclables in a garbage bag, they give you a little sticker. Sometimes it's not a pleasant sticker that says you need to try harder. And so there are disincentives that are placed there as well. But I think, between the two, I would certainly say that we need to really exploit and to take seriously the mechanisms in the market that have worked. There is no question deposit return is our best result in that regard. And I do think that extended producer responsibility is also another incentive, if you will, making producers pay and internalizing those costs builds incentive for them and motivation to be able to go back and redesign improved packaging and products.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to ask about your organization's work, perhaps work that you're aware of when it comes to making recycling realistic in Northern and Indigenous communities. I, of course, am joining you from Northern Canada, from my constituency. Many people in Indigenous and Northern communities want to recycle and don't have a realistic option to do so. And of course, many, particularly in remote communities, have very small landfills. And of course, due to chronic federal underfunding, dealing with those landfills is anywhere from a headache to full-on hazardous. So I'm wondering if you could share, how important it is to get a handle on ensuring recycling is available to, frankly, to all Canadians, including in Northern Indigenous communities.
Yeah, such a critical question. Thank you for that. And I can say personally, I lived in Churchill for 3 years, Manitoba, so I know a little bit about living in the north, and I know consumption.
You know a lot.
I do a little bit of that. I also actually wrote the waste reduction strategy for the Anishinaabe Esky Nation, so I was privileged to work with NAN and their communities to look at what is possible in the north, which is sort of exciting. And sometimes it's always a negative, and it comes with a negative, serious conversations. What's kind of interesting and unique about the North is that they are small circular economies of their own. And so they can take self-care measures and actually take some control in terms of gatekeeping what comes into their community, how it's used in their community, what happens to all of these products at the end of their life. And moreover, have a different kind of relationship with the companies, the retailers that actually bring in products and packaging into their communities, which ultimately could end up as waste materials. So there's no question that they have unique circumstances, but I think there is an opportunity to really leverage those unique circumstances. In NAN, by way of an example, we actually looked at reuse as a community. So looking at, what's consumed and where is there an opportunity to actually supplant single-use anything with some reuse systems, given that they have this closed ecosystem. And so we really think in a circular economy, there's tremendous opportunity, not just to make them equal, but actually to give them a leadership position and to learn from them. Also, I would say culturally, we have a lot to learn in terms of, utilizing everything to its highest value, and to really do a gut check in terms of the way that we consume and how individually, what that means to collectively to those communities. So there's a lot to learn from First Nations communities as well. And I think they're going to be a very important part of our transition towards a circular economy in Canada.
Oh, I thought, do I still have some time, Chair?
20 seconds.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just take the opportunity to thank Ms. St. Godard. Not every day that you have a witness that lived in our riding, especially, with particular experience in Churchill. So appreciate what you shared, and I hope the committee will take into consideration perhaps consulting the work that you did along with NAN, given the First Nations perspective and how critical it is to this discussion and any discussion on sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. We'll now turn to MP Thiersen for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Ms. Scadwell, do you think that Canada has the potential to be a plastic recycling superpower?
Thank you. I do think we have a long way to go before I would term us a superpower, but I do think that we have an opportunity to do much better than we're currently doing. And there is an opportunity when you look at for example, use the deposit return systems, province by province, for getting the products back. The commitment of, my fellow witness spoke on extended producer responsibility. The producers are very committed to this. They want the materials back. I think there's a huge opportunity, and things that prevent us from getting there quicker are things like we do it province by province. It makes data collection very expensive. If you have a different deposit at a border, then you get border fraud. So I do think a national framework could, help us leap forward. But
would you recommend the Government of Canada pursue that kind of a goal?
Absolutely. I would recommend that the Government of Canada take an opportunity to develop a national framework. It's good for Canadians, it's good for producers, and it's good for the circular economy and ultimately the environment.
You mentioned a couple of things just around nationalizing the recycling program and things like that. What would it take for Canada to be the benchmark in terms of plastic recycling? Who are we up against, and what kind of measures are in that?
It's a tough question because it also depends on the retail market in different countries in terms of things like return to retail. So Canada, for example, I'm told all the time we're ahead of the U.S. That said, how do we get to be a leader? If we could take an opportunity to collaborate, we have recycling affiliates in each of the provinces, to take a look at the data, look at what's working in the provinces and help the lagging provinces come along. Invest in public education. Right now we confuse Canadians because how you recycle something in Alberta is different than how you recycle something potentially in Quebec or in Ontario, right? So our opportunity lies in setting up a framework that would help producers and also help the recycling affiliates. We collect data as producers by province. It's super inefficient, very expensive, and duplicative. Where's that opportunity? Collect the data nationally. Look at what's working in what region, not working in another region, and bring that forward. It's only going to make us better. And a national education campaign, but we can only do that if we have national framework where it's the same across the country.
Thank you. Ms. Saint-Godard, similar question to you, I guess. Would you recommend Canada pursue something like being a plastics recycler superpower, and what would you set for benchmarks for that measure to be granted, and who are we up against in terms of competitive countries?
Yeah, I think in some cases we actually are already a superpower. It depends on the material that you're speaking about. So we lag in plastics, but in other materials we're actually doing quite well. Paper, fiber, metals, glass. We actually have some great Canadian case studies and stories to tell, but there is a tremendous opportunity. And if we're going to really focus on plastics, which is the conversation today, to me, it's nonsensical that we are spending now billions of dollars using producer money and relying on average Canadians to be able to collect and transport and clean and then only to ship this material elsewhere for production into new products. And sometimes it's shipped loose and other times it comes in the form of pellets. But really, if we're talking about 9% recycling, we're only talking about collection, not actually recycling. There's a difference. So how much are we actually recycling in this province was probably even lower. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to keep the materials domestic and to redirect them to more domestic productions of other products right here as well. So yeah, I think we could be a superpower.
You would recommend making sure that our recycling stays here?
That would be my preference. I mean, if we were to just measure the carbon in transporting pellets or flake or loose recycling to Southeast Asia, if we actually priced that carbon and quantified that carbon, no question that it would incent us to keep materials here.
Okay, thank you.
It's right on time. We'll now turn to MP Jazik for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to both our witnesses. And it's good to see points of agreement between both of you. Ms. Caldwell, we did have a previous witness here who alluded to European practice and a move towards standardizing beverage containers. Is this something that the Canadian Beverage Association is aware of? Is there any move to have a standardized type of either plastic or aluminum type of container for your products?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Great question. The aluminum is standardized. So it's the same whether it's whatever brand. I have to be careful not to say the brand. So that's already standardized, and it is beneficial. There's similar recycled content by the various brands as well. So while they may not be standardized by size, they are standardized by by what is in the plastic.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, because that seems to be a fairly obvious thing that would enhance both perhaps the deposit return situation as well as recycling. So turning to Ms. Saint-Godard, we have information from Oceana Canada that between 2012 and 2019, the amount of plastic waste discarded in Canada rose by 13%, outpacing both economic and population growth, so disproportionately. Now, I imagine your organization has found this quite distressing. Could you point to specific areas why you think this is happening, why this out of proportion growth is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really have to look and to start to unpack those numbers to maybe to attribute it to a single cause. I would imagine there's probably a number of different causes for that, and part of, and I would imagine smack dab in the middle of that might be the pandemic. Can't remember the years that were cited there.
The pandemic, as a matter of fact, from what the information we were given.
Yeah, so there was a tremendous uptick in single-use plastics utilization during that period of time for a number of different reasons. And in fact, the supply chains, both in terms of recycling and productions, were shut down, if not slowed. And so there was stockpiling of materials, and it got to a point where there wasn't sufficient room, and it wasn't cost effective to stockpile them anymore, and so they were landfilled. So there may be some skewing of the numbers as a result of the pandemic, for sure. I do think that single-use plastics are replacing some other types of packaging, specific to the packaging portion of the plastics faction, and I know that there is more data that we're collecting from outside the home, so away from home consumption, so on the go in our parks. Litter is part of that as well, and also what's being consumed and then eventually discarded in the commercial institutional sector. Canada doesn't have very good data. We have extraordinarily accurate data on residential because of producer responsibility legislation. We have very poor data in the IC&I sector of waste in general, but plastics specifically. We are very much in favor of the registry that the federal government is going to create, because it will tighten that data up and will make it available to all Canadians, including industry, so that we get a better handle on what our performance is. The IC&I data is being collected at some provincial levels, and I imagine that also had an effect on the data that you're speaking to.
Well, thank you. Yes, of course, unless you have data, you don't know what you want to achieve, and obviously you won't want to measure progress towards improvement. So Ms. St. Goddard is clearly talking about the Federal Plastics Registry. Ms. Caldwell, could you comment on your industry's feelings about the registry that was announced a few weeks ago in terms of the potential burden of reporting on a very regular basis? How does your association view that?
And through you, Madam Chair, great question. So we support the concept of a national reporting mechanism, which is the plastics registry. But as it's currently structured, it imposes a strong regulatory burden, and it's not harmonized with the data that's collected by the provincial and territorial organizations. So it's asking for data not currently available or under the purview of producers that may be such as end-of-life fate. So one of the issues we face is the cost of trying to figure out that data. At the end of the day, anything that increases our cost of manufacturing and doing business is an increase in cost price to consumers. So if we could see that data come to a place where it's harmonized with the data collection by the provincial and territorial organizations that currently collect the data, that would be well over.
Thank you. So now we'll turn to MP Blanchard-Jocas for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je poursuis mes questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. These are my questions for Ms. Saint-Gaudin. In Quebec, we're different for many reasons, and here's the proof. There is Recycle Québec in Quebec, and that was done 35 years ago. Recycle Québec has as a priority the circular economy. So we want to leave the current economic model, which is just about extraction. It's a linear model. I think there is different parties that agree with this kind of economy, but what we are valuing is the principle of the expanded producer responsibility, because the end of life of the products is really the responsibility of the producers. So I want you to share, what is the perspective on a Canadian scale? I mean, in Quebec, we didn't wait for the federal government to help us do recycling.
Yeah, we work very closely with Recyc Quebec, and we're very aligned with and support all of the provincial-based circular economy activities that they're showing, that they're leading there. It's an impressive record. I can't speak for all Canadians, but what I can say is any polls that we take, any public polls, any opinion polls, Canadians feel that we need to do more. And they have absolutely stated that they know industry has a role to play, including those that are brand holders and sellers, but other producers and manufacturers as well. So what I would say is we have a lot of good examples that we could leverage from the Quebec situation. There's leadership being shown right across the country. There are provincial governments that are either transitioning to full producer responsibility where it used to be cost shared. There are new provinces that are coming online, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Alberta, an expansion in BC. So right now there's a lot of activity as it relates to producer responsibility. I do want to call out the leadership of the municipal sector. Using their bylaws, some of them have banned the use of and the purchase of certain supply products and materials. They have made their suppliers and vendors through their procurement requirements more responsible. They are using their power of buying collectively and individually, and of course their leadership through their bylaws as well. And municipalities have been a tremendous convener in terms of coalescing and educating their residents as well. So there's tremendous leadership, and really Quebec is at the helm of that.
We'll now turn to MP Ashton for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My question is for Ms. Saint-Godard, once more, really focusing on the question of disincentives to plastics recycling. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a bit about what disincentives prevent a higher percentage of plastics recycled. Are these disincentives technical? Are they economic? Are they regulatory? If you could share some thoughts on that front.
Yeah, so I guess defining disincentives could be different depending on the vantage point. I would say that the introduction of producer responsibility, one of its objectives was, in fact, to disincentivize or incent, depending on which side of the coin you're looking at, producers and manufacturers to look at better designed goods, be they a swapping out of materials for a better choice, be they maybe refill, reuse, and then, sort of lastly, but I think moreover, just really understanding the costs of the systems. Before there was producer responsibilities, industry had no idea how much municipalities and taxpayers were actually spending on blue box. I do think that there is opportunities for us to look at costing pollution. And so a great example of that is charging for plastic bags at the point of sale. So I was involved many moons ago when the provincial government in Ontario was contemplating banning plastic bags. There was obviously a reaction by the retail sector, as we would expect, and the plastic manufacturers of plastic bags. They, in lieu of banning them from sale, they worked with the province, us as a convener of in that discussion, to look at other mechanisms. And what they committed to is actually a reduction of the supply of plastic bags to consumers by half at a certain time frame. And they exceeded that time frame and they exceeded that amount because many of them actually priced a plastic bag, which and offered a reusable one, which we know now is really quite successful, and in fact carve the runway for the federal government, the government of Canada, come in and then effectively ban them as a single-use item. So disincentives pricing pollution can be a very effective tool to incent the kind of behavior you want and disincent the behavior you don't, and that's at every level.
And that's our time. So that brings us to the end of our first panel. Thank you to the witnesses, Christia Scaldwell and Joanne St. Goddard, for your testimonies and participation in the committee's study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. Please see the clerk for any questions. You may also submit additional information through the clerk. We'll suspend briefly to allow our witnesses to leave, and we'll resume with our second panel.
Thank you.
Haven't appeared yet. So I think we'll start with our virtual witnesses in the interest of time so that we can get underway. So welcome back. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. It's now my pleasure to welcome from Colia, Eric Leclerc, Plastic Engineering Director by video conference, and also by video conference, Michelle Saunders, Vice President of Sustainability for Food, Health, and Consumer Products Canada. So up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we'll proceed with rounds of questions. So we'll begin with Mr. Leclerc. I invite you to make an opening statement for up to 5 minutes.
Bonjour, je suis Eric Leclerc. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Leclerc. I'm director in plastics engineering in Coalia. Coalia is a transfer technology center in Quebec. We are the only one specialized in terms of plastics. And in Canada, there are 4. We're a CAT, Technology Access Center. We are the only one in plastics engineering. We are a non-profit. We're based inside a college, that Thetford Mines, Quebec, and a cégep. There are about 35 employees. We actively work in various sectors. The plastic recycling sector is important for us. We perform work for all the supply chain, whether for municipal recyclers, people who mold new pieces, or industries that generate plastic materials. We find the best ways to recycle polymers. We have all kinds of equipment for the transformation in terms of recycling. We have a lab. We work on we work with different universities that work with us, other organizations like Recyc Québec, for example, or we work also with GAPC in Canada. So I don't know why I was asked to testify here today.
So that's the end of your opening statement? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
We'll now turn to Michelle Saunders, Vice President of Sustainability, for your opening statement of 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to speak today on the critical issue of plastics recycling. Food, Health, and Consumer Products of Canada, or FHCP, is the leading national trade association representing manufacturers of food, beverage, consumer goods, and health products. Our members are Canadian-owned and international companies of all sizes, manufacturing both company-owned branded products and private label or store brand products. Together, they produce the vast majority of packaged goods sold on every aisle of Canada's grocery stores and pharmacies. Sustainability is a key priority for FHCP, and our efforts on plastics, plastics recycling, and extended producer responsibility, or EPR, impact all of our members. In 2019, FHCP endorsed the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's vision for a new plastics economy, which focuses on eliminating plastic pollution through better product design and innovation, collecting and recycling, reusing, or composting the plastics in the market, and reducing the reliance on virgin petroleum-based plastic resins and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Our work with plastics recycling is threefold. First, FHCP supports our members in packaging innovations. Our members are largely transitioning their packaging portfolios to align with the Golden Design Rules for plastic packaging, which is a set of common principles to improve design for recyclability. Second, FHCP and our members are actively engaged in discussions with the federal government on matters related to plastics. Each of the policies considered by Environment and Climate Change Canada, be it the Federal Plastics Registry or policies like recycled content mandates for certain product categories, and labeling requirements for recyclability and compostability, each of these policy areas directly link to provincially mandated EPR. Thirdly, FHCP directly engages with provincial governments, regulatory bodies, and producer organizations like Circular Materials and Eco-Entreprise Quebec to ensure that provincial policy will result in the development and implementation of effective and efficient recycling programs. EPR has been in effect in various forms in Canada since 2004, expanding across the country and transitioning all programs to full EPR, meaning industry is assuming the full responsibility for the financing and delivery of province-wide curbside recycling programs. By 2027, 97% of Canadians will live in a jurisdiction with full EPR. Over the past 20 years, Canadian producers have contributed more than $6.3 billion, and in 2024, producer costs across Canada exceeded $1 billion. We support EPR as the only way to achieve scale and ensure appropriate outcomes for materials, but the rapid pace of massive cost escalation is unsustainable. We need governments, including the federal government, to make strategic capital investments in recycling capacity and new technologies. Research commissioned by the federal government indicates a $6.5 billion technology gap to achieve a circular economy. This cannot be borne by producers alone. Plastic is a resource, and we must ensure it is collected and does not enter the environment. But not all plastics are the same. Mechanical recycling is a good solution to process rigid plastics, but we have extremely limited outcomes in Canada with flexible plastics and need strategic investments to ensure we have sufficient and appropriate processing capacity and end markets for this material. We need targets that are ambitious but achievable and reflect the material that is in the market. And lastly, we need engagement throughout the federal government, including Environment Climate Change Canada, Health Canada, Agri-Food and Agriculture Canada, Innovation Science and Economic Development, and the Canada Infrastructure Bank. We must work together to scale and accelerate a circular economy for plastics as a priority for the government, for industry, and for the environment. Thank you.
Very much. It's now my pleasure to welcome our final two witnesses from BioLabMate Composite Inc., Dr. Sarika Kumari, Chief Executive Officer and Co-founder, and Sanjay Dubey, Chief Technology Officer and Co-founder. So welcome to our committee. You can make an opening statement between the two of you of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, honorable member of the committee. I'm Sarika Kumari, CEO of BioLabMate, and it's an honor to speak with you today on the subject of innovation, science, and recycling plastics, with a particular emphasis on the critical issue of plastic waste generated in research lab and medical facility. Globally, we generate approximately 300 million tons of plastic waste annually, with a significant portion attributed to the medical and research sector. The COVID-19 pandemic has intensified this challenge, increasing reliance on PPE, testing kits, and other disposable plastic items. Research lab alone contribute around 5.5 million tons of plastic waste each year, a number of equivalent to the total plastic waste output of some small countries. Single-use plastic in research labs remain a significant but frequently overlooked problem. For instance, a single lab can produce around 44,600 pieces of single-use plastic monthly, depending on the size of the lab, costing between Canadian dollar 14,000 to 18,000 and weighing up to 60 to 80 kg. When scaled across entire university and research institute, the magnitude of the problem becomes clear. At BioLabMate, we conducted extensive market research engaging with over 100 potential customers in research and healthcare settings. Through this process, we identified bioplastic as a viable and sustainable solution. Our focus is on utilizing locally available renewable resources, specifically seaweed, to create bioplastic that can replace traditional single-use plastic items seamlessly. While recycling has long been promoted as a solution to plastic waste, it is not enough to address the scale of the issue. Recycling is often hindered by several challenges. For example, contamination. Plastic mixed with the food and other waste are difficult to recycle effectively. Infrastructure gaps. Canada recycling infrastructure is insufficient for handling all the recyclable material. Downcycling. Plastic often degrade in quality after recycling, making them unsuitable for reuse in precision environment like research lab. To address these challenges, we recommend stricter regulation on what types of plastic can be recycled, investment in advanced recycling technology, public education, particularly in research lab, to improve recycling practices and reduce contamination. At BioLabMate, we view bioplastic as a crucial part of the solution to plastic waste in research lab. Unlike conventional plastic derived from fossil fuel, bioplastic are made from renewable resources such as seaweed. These bioplastic are designed to be biodegradable or compostable, significantly reducing their environmental impact. Our seaweed-based bioplastic are ideal for replacing single-use items in labs such as pipette tips, plates, tubes, thereby cutting both waste and carbon emission. Seaweed as the primary material for our bioplastic offer a host of benefits. For example, environmental impact. Seaweed is a rapidly renewable resource that absorbs CO2, helping to mitigate climate change. It grows without freshwater, fertilizer, and pesticide, making it a sustainable alternative to land-based crops. Also, economic opportunity. Seaweed farming provides a new source of revenue for coastal communities, especially in Atlantic Canada, offering job creation and economic diversification. Despite the potential of bioplastic, there are hurdles to overcome. For example, cost. Currently, bioplastic are more expensive than traditional plastic, but we anticipate that cost will decrease with growing demand and increased production. Infrastructure. The limited number of industrial composting facility in Canada hinders the proper degradation of these bioplastic. Also, the R&D support continue to research in essential to improve the performance and cost effectiveness of bioplastic. We urge the government to provide grants and subsidies for companies like BioLabMate, which are developing sustainable alternatives. Mandate the use of bioplastic in high-waste sector, particularly healthcare and research. Support research and development effort to accelerate bioplastic adoption. Expand composting infrastructure to ensure bioplastic are processed correctly. Recycling alone cannot solve Canada's plastic waste crisis. A combined approach improves recycling practices and the adoption of bioplastic is essential. BioLabMate seaweed-based bioplastic offer a sustainable and scalable alternative, particularly for the research and medical sector. With government support, Canada can lead the transition to a circular economy, significantly reducing plastic waste and its environmental impact. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your question.
Thank you to all of our witnesses for your opening remarks. We'll now open the floor for questions. Please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed, and we'll start the questioning with MP Viersen for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. My first questions are to the BioLab composite folks. You mentioned that the seaweed bioplastic is more expensive than traditional plastic. How much more? What are we looking at?
So this is our product, and we are doing a patent on it. So we exactly don't know like how much it would be costly if we compare to the fossil fuel plastic, but it's not that costly. So the polymer are like two grades. One when you work with the research lab grade, and one it is like making it to the commercial base. Seaweed biopellets are near to the same as you count as a research-based pellets for the virtual.
We learned last meeting that people use the term bioplastic in kind of two ways. One meaning it's biodegradable, and one meaning that it's sourced from a plant, basically.
Yeah. So bioplastic is taken is very common now saying like bioplastic, but bioplastic is not bioplastic until it is biodegradable and biocompostable. Like it's home we are from the BioLab. We are making the biopellets that are home compostable. So it should be compostable. It should not need any industrial setup to compost it in a big area.
And that it would break down into similar to a seaweed residue.
Yeah, as we know that people have used seaweed in their backyard to grow their plants. So yeah, it's going to go in the soil, and it's actually going to go as a fertilizer in the soil.
Okay, and that's the goal.
That's the goal.
Okay, how would a aggressive pursuit of recycled plastic maybe hamper your like if we pursue recycled plastic versus bioplastic? What would the impact be on that?
I feel recycling is one option, but it is not the very best option, because any which ways what we are doing is we are again grinding those plastic, and then it's going to stay in there, right? As bioplastic, we are doing it like you are making it, and it's going to the end use, and then it's just going in the nature all again. So it's not going to hamper. Yeah.
Thank you. To the food and health. Water jugs, for example, that's a major plastic item that the private sector has totally developed a reuse circular economy for. I also noticed that I come from the honey capital of Canada, and no matter which honey farm I go to, it seems that the honey ends up in the exact same container, just with a different name on it. What kind of work is being done with that, and how will that impact, say, recycle versus reuse and the standardization of these products?
Thank you for that question. I think standardization of packaging for a broad spectrum of products, it's a pretty hefty ask. I think within product categories, certainly we are seeing efforts to standardize certain product packaging. But producers need the opportunity to define and determine the best material that suits their particular product, whether it is food product, beverage, consumer goods, or a medical device or health product. And they need to make sure that their consumer can afford it and will accept it. So there are a lot of considerations that go into the packaging decisions. We hear the conversation on standardization. I would just tell you that we are working with a common set of principles to improve recyclability by design.
Around infrastructure bank, do you have any examples of the infrastructure bank actually lending any money in the pursuit of recycled plastic or reuse plastic?
I have no examples.
Okay. Because we heard that as well earlier. Do you have any indication as to why the infrastructure bank isn't being used in the pursuit of recycled plastics or alternative plastic?
I'm not sure why. All I can say is we support the infrastructure bank prioritizing recycling infrastructure across Canada as part of their green jobs investment. It seems to us that it will fall within that strategic priority. I can't speak to why that hasn't happened.
Thank you.
You still have some time left.
Oh wait. Just, I guess going back to that, the infrastructure bank, if the model isn't working, would you have a suggestion for something else? Like these programs have nice names and nice goals, but if they're not doing the thing, do you have any perhaps alternative, maybe common sense plan to how do we make these things work?
Sure. So what we've seen across the country, whether it's with provincial EPR or federal plastics policies, governments have implemented regulations or proposed regulations and then lifted their hands. What we need are governments to remain engaged, to be making strategic investments to enable and accelerate scalable solutions to recycling plastics and to encouraging recycled content where it's appropriate and safe to do so. We believe that there is opportunity within Environment Climate Change Canada, Innovation, Science, Economic Development, and the Canada Infrastructure Bank, all to be making sizable strategic investments rather than
Thank
piecemeal
you.
grants.
That's over now, so maybe
Thank you.
someone else will get to that.
Thank you.
So now we will turn to MP Longfield for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I want to continue on the line of questioning that Mr. Viersen was just going down with Ms. Saunders. When we look at the provincial and federal responsibilities in this area, I know the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment have come up with a strategy for zero plastic waste for Canada. They have 10 items that on that strategy. The 8th item on the strategy has to do with science and research, which is really where this committee picks up the thread. It says that the decision makers need to have robust evidence and data in order to make the proper decisions, that the research can happen on a number of fronts to improve understanding of where macro and microplastic waste comes from, how it enters the environment, the impacts it has on people and the environment. So I'm wondering from your perspective in terms of research, a previous witness today said, we've researched this thing, more than it needs to be. It seems to me there's still research around where plastic is entering the waste streams, how much plastic waste is being generated, how plastic waste is being reused and entering other applications as an input to other industries. Could you comment on where the industry is at in terms of monitoring plastic waste and the opportunities that it isn't waste, it's plastic resource, and how do we use that resource that's not fit for purpose for one application, but maybe for others?
Thank you very much for that thoughtful question. So we fundamentally agree that plastic is a resource. It is both a material and economic resource to be recovered. It should not ever enter the environment. We work with governments across the country, all of the provincial governments and the federal government on data collection. Our members are constantly reporting on the materials coming into the system that they are supplying, either through import or manufacture domestic, and that's at the provincial level. We also work with producer responsibility organizations who then report on the outcomes. That's an eventuality. We don't have that nuance in the system yet. And we're working with the federal government on the Federal Plastics Registry. And the aim of that initiative is to help harmonize the data amongst the EPR programs and understand the flow. We fundamentally support good data to make all-informed decisions. We have some concerns and have made some recommendations to the government. Producers are pretty stretched on their ability. The volume and granularity of data being asked of them is pretty tough for only anyone other than the largest companies, but certainly support good data.
But picking up on that, I mean, data is expensive, but so is waste, and particularly plastic. It's expensive to create. And I know of one business in Guelph that I was working with that had tons of plastic waste coming off their line. And there was another customer in Guelph that was looking to make speakers for outdoor use. And the two of them just needed to get introduced to each other. And they shared molds, they shared some science, and they came up with a solution where instead of hauling plastic waste away, the other company in Guelph was able to use that instead of buying virgin plastic, was actually able to reduce their cost. So both of them reduced cost. So an investment in data could help massively in terms of material cost. Is that not an opportunity?
It is an opportunity. There's a cost in data. There's a cost in waste. You're absolutely right. I think what's fundamental to me from your example is the need for collaboration and knowing who's in your community and who's looking for the same common ends. So we work with our members to try and build those collaborative opportunities. Appreciate the example.
And probably federal and provincial harmonization would help that. So thank you.
Correct.
And
Thank you.
Monsieur Leclerc, you're in a beautiful part of Canada. Thetford Mines I've been through many times, back when there was an asbestos mine active there. And now looking at the incredible job that you're doing to improve environmental impact of plastics. There's a story there. And I see from reading on your website, you're looking at bioresins as an opportunity and you're developing new types of bioresin. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Ces travaux ne sont pas réalisés. This work is not being done internally or independently. All of this work is always to the benefit of a company. We have 5 or 6 various clients who are trying to develop bioresins. We're helping them to build something which will be commercially viable.
Well, maybe they could come to Guelph. We do have a plastics center here that's also developing bioresins that maybe your researchers could benefit from to make those connections.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Good, thank you. And really, you're bringing in the next generation of plastic engineers that will be thinking along the lines of sustainability. I think that really is good for Quebec and it's good for Canada. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll now turn to MP Blanchard-Jelka for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les
Thank you,
témoins.
Madam Chair. I would like to thank our witnesses. First question is for Mr. Leclerc. Mr. Leclerc, you explain your role in the organization that you represent, that you're working with. So it's a technology transfer center. I would like to hear about innovation efforts. What kind of suggestion could you share with us regarding plastic recycling that could be used in the future to protect the environment further? Well, there are many different ways and we work at different levels. There's the eco design right from the start to build products in a more eco-responsible way. We help businesses to develop products which are made from recycled materials. I also sit on standardization committees. And on the other hand, we also work to enhance the value of plastics after use, whether they come from sorting facilities or others. We find the best technologies to add value, to upcycle, if you wish, these materials and to be able to reuse these materials as an important resource. Thank you, Mr. Leclerc. You know, to do research, what's always needed is money. And as we've had a few witnesses here in the committee and following discussions with people from Synchronex or people from the technology transfer centers, we're always talking about how difficult it is to get funding from the federal government, that these technology transfer centers, there are 59 of them in Quebec. I'm proud to tell my colleagues that the first such center is from my region in the Lower St. Lawrence. But money is needed for all of this. And several times requests from these people from Synchronex were to be able to offer through the National Center of Research funding of $100 million. But in Canada, these Other ones get $350,000. So it's like saying, since you have a lot of activity in Quebec, we limit your financing to 250. Have you ever been a victim of this kind of unequal funding for your centers? I'm not in a good position to answer because we're also rated as a technology transfer center in Canada, not only in Quebec. We have access to financing from them as other centers. We apply to different programs to get funding. Clearly, you're right when you say money is at the heart of our concern, and that it's getting harder to do research. But with us at Coalia, I think we're we're pretty lucky. I think we get a good success rate when we have when we apply for funding, but additional funding would naturally be welcome, because at Coalia we also have the mining sector, and there's much more money, much more funding available than in the plastic sector. Thank you, Mr. Leclerc, and your expertise, your experience, what you were doing with Coalia. What could you share with us regarding innovation, recycling, single plastic use? Do you think there are certain measures that government should put into place to counter this situation? Well, I think we are on the right track in terms of regulation to make producers responsible. And I think the changes that are happening in Quebec right now with Éco-Entreprise Québec, I think this is good news. We will be able to increase the quality of materials that will be coming out of the sorting centers. If we have a better quality coming out, the recyclers will do their work more efficiently and will have materials which will lower production costs, and we'll be able to use them in new applications. And everything goes through technology naturally. And this is where we're working as well to determine which are the most beneficial and efficient technologies.
Leclerc, pouvez-vous nous parler davantage?
Thank you, Mr. Leclerc. You talked about innovation regarding polymers. Could you share some things that some partnerships you've had with the private sector, for example? Well, we have quite a variety of partnerships. I couldn't tell you. For example, there are a lot of nice examples in Quebec. Businesses like Soleno, which builds pipes. We worked with them to incorporate, to maximize the highest possible content of recycled materials, and by respecting the life cycle of 75 or 100 years. We worked also with them for.
Questioner will pursue that line of questioning. It was interesting. So now we will turn to MP Ashton for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. And my first question is to Ms. Saunders, a question for the Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada. We, of course, have heard a fair bit about the extended producer responsibility, which is a policy approach where producers' responsibility for a product is extended to the post-consumer stage. I'm wondering if you could share with us what are EPR's benefits and how is EPR being implemented in Canada?
Thanks. I'm always happy to talk about EPR. It is what keeps our members awake at night. It is a policy tool whereby industry across the board is assuming responsibility for funding and delivering recycling programs. We call them blue box in most provinces. We work with provincial governments and producer responsibility organizations. it really is a way for producers to have control of the system, to make sure we're designing the systems and the materials that go together and can be collected. We have greater insights when industry is leading EPR versus the old historic municipal programs that really didn't allow for scale. The other thing that we're seeing with EPR, one of the things that we need to be exploring is having producers have access to their materials once it's been collected, because we have to be recouping for recycled content. We can't just be purchasing on an open market. The demand is significant. We're very mindful also of EPR being introduced in the United States, and that will really impact the cost of recycled resins in Canada. So we fully support EPR. We think there are a lot of refinements, but we're really working with provincial governments to better align some of the regulatory provisions in their EPR programs.
Okay. Ma prochaine question, c'est pour Monsieur Leclerc de Coalia.
My next question is for Mr. Leclerc from Coalia. Could you tell us about challenges when we're talking about the quality of the plastics that have been recycled several times? What's the situation there, and how can we find solutions and face those challenges? Once again, this goes through technology, the ways of recycling materials to minimize degradation during the transformation or the recycling process. So there's a process, but also the materials. We can add additives to better protect them, to avoid oxidation, and add stabilizers to limit the contaminating effect. There's a few ways to proceed. Do you have suggestions for our committee, things we could raise on this topic? Well, the way to retrieve materials, I think it's important to sort them well. There's some incompatibilities between various polymer families. So these materials need to be sorted either downstream or to find proceeds to sort these materials. We have Canadian and Quebec businesses that developed technologies to be very efficient in terms of sorting the various plastics.
Okay, and I also have a question for BioLabMate. If they could share some more background on the differences between the kinds of plastics that we've heard of: biodegradable, compostable, as well as bioplastic. If they could share some feedback on that front.
So you asked like what kind of difference between the plastic, bioplastic we are saying over here, right? So we usually say like plastic, those are like all fossil fuel based, like petroleum based, polypropylene and HDPE. When we say about bioplastic, even people say PLA, polylactic acid, is a bioplastic, but it takes 20 years to degrade in the soil, or it needs industrial compost area. When we say about, it is bioplastic, it should get, within a month or 3, it should get decomposed in the soil, or it should not require any extra, the industrial setup to compose them. If it requires extra composting facility, that means we are, making another burden on the, like maybe for that province or maybe for the country. So if it is home compostable, it is best way to say that it is a bioplastic that can be home compostable, and you can compose them any which ways you want. You don't need to again recycle them. You don't need to take them to the another facility to recycle or compose them.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if you have perhaps some more feedback for our committee on how important it is for the public to be made aware of those differences.
Definitely. As from BioLabMate, we are mostly talking about the research lab and the medical facilities plastic. We need to educate people, particularly in that sector, because we even don't know the data, like how much plastic has been used in a particular research lab or in a medical facility. We even don't have those data generated. So we should.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now start the second round of questioning for 5 minutes with MP Kitchen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate everyone that's being here today and your presentations. And it's quite helpful that we've heard over the last couple of weeks a lot of very similar information from everybody. And especially when we talk and we've learned a lot about bioplastics. And where we go between virgin plastic and bioplastic and the steps that we need to take. You know, and I find it interesting that the great Paul Harvey once said, you know, self-government does not work without self-discipline. And in my previous life, I was the registrar for a profession, and I used to say to my professionals that without self-discipline and self-regulation, we're doomed to be falling into the hands of government. And that's a big concern. I mean, and you're an industry that wants to regulate itself, then should be able to self-sustain itself as well. And oftentimes we've heard throughout these meetings, or from many people, is about the coming here and saying, we want government money. And my question, I guess, to start off with to you, Ms. Kumari, is what does the profession, the industry need to do to self-sustain itself?
I think right now what we have seen is like educate people, because I think we are not, like, when we use the single-use plastic outside the research lab and medical facility, we kind of educated, but when we use that in the research lab and medical facility, we are not educated enough. Should we recycle them? Should we just throw it in the garbage? Or should we think about bioplastic? Or what should we do next? We just follow our experiments and we just throw them in the garbage and it just go where it needs to, either incinerated or in the garbage. We don't know where it's going.
Thank you. So that also then leads to a little bit into my next question, because a lot of what you've talked about in issues about bioplastics, and we talk about medicine and healthcare. And what the average Canadian that's listening here today, they hear about plastics and they're going, okay, well, we're going to go to bioplastics. But the reality is that's not doable. Because the reality is, when we look at things like syringes, we look at IV lines, we look at intubation tubes, catheters, you know, masks and gloves, they all contain PFA, which is basically polyfluoroalkyl, which is part of the plastics, of virgin plastics. And if all of a sudden this government is banning PFA, that's going to have a huge impact, because if now we go to bioplastics and we get water on it, where we've heard from witnesses just the last week, where the moment it gets water, it becomes decompostable. And all of a sudden, how do you do that if you've got an IV line and you're running a fluid through that? How do you do that if you're a syringe or an intubation tube? And your comments about that, if you would.
I think we should understand, like, the data which we need on the bioplastic is not been especially used in the research and lab medical facility. We do not have the accurate data. I think me and Sarika, we talked to the different lab. We went to their, talking to the lab manager and seeking those data, what kind of a plastic they're using and where they are using. Are they using with the lifelines, like, for example, the human biocells and such things, which cannot be recycled in something like, which cannot be, or is just used for the experimentation and can be thrown into the garbage, which can also be recycled and used. So the thing is, like, the data is not there exactly, and it's difficult for us to make any judgment on that part. So if we have a data, we can come out and say, like, okay, we can replace this kind of plastic. And me and Sarika, we always say, like, as a BioLabMate, never target to replace everything in the medical sector, But there are few higher quantity which can be replaced with our practices, but we have to know what's the data outside there. And we always had
Thank you. But so to Mr. Leclerc, and to further on that conversation, have you you mentioned you have labs and you've been working with industry and universities. I'm wondering from you, have you ever sat in a situation where the university have been asking you along those lines when we're talking about medical plastics, et cetera?
We haven't done many projects in the medical sector. Perhaps in other more industrial sectors where we have to find replacement materials that do not contain PFAs, to find equivalent materials, but they do not include those components. But they are not biopolymers.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'm running out of time, but just quickly, if to our other witness, if she could, you mentioned in your report about the 9 golden rules that are out there, and I'm just wondering comments as to who set this up and whether you could maybe even provide in writing to the committee the 9 golden rules and what organizations were involved in that.
Certainly, we'd be happy to provide that in writing as a follow-up to this presentation. The 9 Golden Design Rules were established by the Consumer Goods Forum, which is a global organization representing grocery manufacturers and grocery retailers. They are adopted across Canada by the Canada.
If you could please submit that because
Certainly
we're quite
we will.
over now. Thank
Certainly
you.
we will. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we will turn to MP Diab for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. So, as an Atlantic Canadian on the panel, I'm going to turn first of all to you, doctors from Newfoundland. Welcome to our committee. I read that your mandate says we are on a mission to eradicate the single use of plastic from research labs and medical facilities, and that was sort of the concentration of what you were talking about, particularly in Newfoundland and the Atlantic provinces, I believe is what I read. And then you were, Dr. Dubé, you were talking about not enough data. How do we get you data, or how do you get data, or how does that happen? And what partnerships or who else do you work with, whether it's Atlantic Canada or anywhere else in the research that you're doing?
So with the Atlantic provinces, I think we can start from the university, Memorial University. So we did a PhD, and I'm doing my still PhD under there. And what I found, like when we reached to the sustainability department, they didn't have those data. We asked them, do you have anything information on the amount of plastic? Do you have any generator or any classification on those things? They didn't have. So we decided having a partnership with the sustainability department in the universities can be really helpful. And where they can play maybe a third party, they can help us with them making a strategy where they can reduce the plastic by the reduced recycled way, and something like they can also be look for the alternative way, like a BioLabMed is doing it.
And I guess, and do you see a world where we can be less reliant on single-use plastic?
Yes, of course, because being a young and we are entrepreneurs, we are talking to the different people around the world, and BioLabMed have been recently selected for one of the top accelerator program for the seaweed in Portugal, where we're going to see the different 20 startups, So we say there is a highlight that the people is working, and then you see the Europe where the people are investing heavily in the bioplastic sector. Then you see the Asia where especially the Japan, they have the highest quantity of biopolymers generated. So they are also moving forward with the something is more than a plastic, they wanted to resolve this issue from the root. And I think the EPR is good, but the being the bioplastic is you are just closing the tap, what I listened, understand? Yeah.
On your website, you mentioned the potential for ocean-based derived products as opposed to single use. How does the East Coast or the Atlantic provinces factor in this innovation?
So for making any bioplastic, you need to pin down with any particular feedstock. You can make bioplastic from the corn, starch, potato, whatever. So when we were in the Atlantic region, we found that the seaweed also can be used for extracting the biopolymers, but there is a multi-purpose for the seaweed. It was very advantageous for us because first thing, the material made from the seaweed can be bio-based and biodegradable. Second, you do not require any cultivation for you don't need an agriculture farm. You can grow in the marine environment. And the third thing, best part for the seaweed is easy to cultivate and harvest. And the fourth part, the Atlantic regions has the abundant quantity and a good quality of a seaweed. So we thought like, okay, the feedstock issue has been resolved because whenever you are making a bioplastic manufacturing plant, the highest risk is on your feedstock. If you can resolve that, it can welcome the investment for the research and development. It can be scalable technology, you know.
What can the federal government do to assist? Or is it another level of government, or is it enterprise? Is it education, universities, colleges?
I think last 2-3 years when we started working with the bioplastic, especially with the seaweed, we start showing that the new things are coming, like new accelerator program from the Ocean Supercluster and all those things. They started coming and supporting us. And also, as well as there are few provinces like Nova Scotia, they are heavily built on those. And Newfoundland started giving the importance on the seaweed and as a secondary source of revenue for the fishermen, as well as use them for the multi-purpose, including the bioplastic. So we expect that the federal government can help with the understanding the regulation on the seaweed growing, something which can be, because whenever you are dealing with a bioplastic, you require the feedstock in a high quantity, you know. So there are strict environmental rules, but the growing with the seaweed has no harm on the environment, you know. So there has to be some research to be done. So of course, you need some money on the research. And I just talked about the European partners. So when we see those people, like we see that their universities, their government is heavily investing to the enhancing the bioplastic capacity for at the university levels, you know. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Appreciate it. And sorry I didn't get to the other witnesses. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll now turn to MP Blanchard-Joka for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Continuing along with the questions for the people at Biocomposite. You said that you need more data. I just want to understand which data you need. At the first round of questions, the people from the Circular Innovation Council were telling us that you don't need to do any research anymore. You already have an overall picture of the situation and you know what to do. So I'd like to hear you on that. I understand that you might be able to develop new innovation, but in terms of recycling, we already know what to do, but we're not doing it.
Research lab and the medical facility. That's what when I talked about. So I remember when we gave a proposal to our university regarding like what we need the data was that the type of plastic they use, what type of experiment they perform, what kind of life sciences plastic they use for particular that part, what is the quantification, and where is the inventory? Where is the inventory? You know, inventory has to be matched to the disposal where it is going, you know, the plastic, it has to be matched. So these are something which can be questioned, and this type of things can help us to understand the proper quantification, because if you have the proper quantification, you can say like, okay, for this particular area, for the research and medical facility, this kind of plastic can be recycled, this can be the alternative, and this can be other source of way we can improve the sustainability. Yeah.
Pour avoir des données, il faut faire de la recherche.
To get data, you need to do research. So just to understand well the translation, in order to get data, you need to do research. Are you judging that the federal government is investing as a priority significantly on doing research, in particular in innovation for plastic recycling?
Vous savez, le choix de réponse est seulement oui ou non.
As you know, it's just oh yes or a no. I don't need a scientific study on that.
I think, can you say your question again?
Oui, ma question. Est-ce que vous
Yes,
avez
my question is, do you need additional financial support to do research and then generate data on plastics recycling?
Because with that, we can hire interns, we can make them work, we can have a people, an expert who can talk about, because we don't have the knowledge for everything, right? So we need people from the different background to understand on how we can make the mitigations, you know, plan.
For time. So for our final questioner, it'll be MP Ashton for 2.5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. So my question is again for the food, health, and consumer products. Ms. Saunders, we know, of course, this past spring, the government announced the creation of a plastics registry. We're wondering how will this registry impact producers and what data should the registry prioritize?
Thanks very much. So we are actively engaged in discussions with Environment Climate Change Canada on the establishment of the Plastics Registry. fully support good data. This will be a really heavy lift for producers who, in fact, don't have a lot of the data that is requested. Our recommendation to Environment Climate Change Canada is to more closely and precisely align with definitions and terms in provincial EPR programs, so producers fully understand their obligations. And really, our priority would be to focus on consumer-facing packaging, that which is already captured under provincial EPR programs. That would be our priority as a start.
Okay, thank you for that. Just wondering the time that I have remaining, just probably about a minute, if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our committee, as of course we reflect on what kind of recommendations we can bring forward.
If that's to me, I would love to take that 30 seconds.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So look, good data is absolutely mandatory for good decisions. We need that. We do need research in plastics recycling, and we do need data. Industry needs support. There have been tremendous external realities. The closure of China as an export market for us in 2018, COVID in 2020 caused massive disruptions, both for the consumer packaged goods sector as well as the waste management sector. What we're seeing now is cost is a lack of investment over time because we've had other priorities, keeping business running and keeping our employees and families healthy. But we need investments because we are faced with the inflationary pressure, and we do not have the infrastructure in place today to meet our regulatory obligations or the goals of government. So really looking for a lot of support and continued collaboration. Thanks very much for that.
So that is our time. And I want to thank you to our witnesses, Dr. Kamari, Mr. Dubé, Mr. Leclerc, and Ms. Saunders, for your testimonies and participations in the committee's study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. If you have any additional information that you wish to submit, you may do so in written form through the clerk. So anyway, our next committee meeting will be on Thursday, October the 3rd, and that'll be our final session on the recycling of plastics. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Yes, please. Okay, meeting's adjourned.